Dear brothers and sisters, in a hadith that was narrated in Bukhari and Muslim by Umar ibn al-Khattab, the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with the companions one day when the hadith was narrated by Umar ibn al-Khattab. So he's saying that while we were sitting with the Prophet ﷺ, a strange man came in who had no signs of traveling, whom we've never seen before. And he came to the Prophet ﷺ and leaned his knees against the knees of the Prophet ﷺ and started asking him questions. And he asked him, the first thing he asked the Prophet to define was, he said, "Tell me about Islam." And the Prophet answered. And then he said, "Tell me about Iman." And the Prophet answered. And then he said, "Tell me about Ihsan." And the Prophet answered. And then he asked him to tell me about Judgment Day. And then the Prophet gave him an answer. So the Prophet ﷺ was asked 4 things. And when we think about the hadith and think about why they came into this order, why did the angel Jibreel came and asked the Prophet ﷺ to define what Islam is, and then told him after that to define what Iman, what does it entail to be a believer, and then he asked him to define Ihsan, and then talk about the Judgment Day. When we think about it, we look at Islam, and he said Islam is that, we're testifying that there's no God but Allah, and we do the prayers, and we give charity, and we do the fasting, and we do the pilgrimage, the 5 pillars of Islam. And then he told him, okay, you got him right. What is Iman? So the Prophet ﷺ said, "An tu'mina billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi," and he defined all the things that we need to do to become believers. And then he defined Ihsan for him. He said that you worship Allah as if you're seeing Him. And if you're not seeing Him, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees you. Now, when we look at Islam, for us to be considered Muslims, what that does, it means that we just came into the first step of coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and getting into paradise. In a story in Surah Al-Hujurat verses 14, when the Bedouins, or when the Arabs of the tribes around the Prophet ﷺ came to him and they told him that, we came, we protected you, we are believers. They're trying to to show off to the Prophet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came with verse 14 when he said, قَالَتِ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا. That when those people said آمَنَّا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا. No, you have not attained that true believing. So there is a step between al-Islam and then al-believe, to become a believer. So we have to distinguish between the first two, because this is what really defines it. When you think about al-Islam and Ihsan, or Islam and Iman, think about a company that everybody wants to get into. And that company has 5 different requirements. They tell you, you meet those requirements, you're in. That's all what you need to do. And Islam, it's the same way. You have those 5 pillars of Islam, then you're considered Muslim. So now you are in Islam, now we are Muslims. Then what do we need to do? Then we have to look at Iman. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ defined Iman when he said that we have to believe in Allah, believe in the messengers, believe in the angels, believe in the books. And in the previous khutbah we talked about what does it really mean to say I believe in Allah. When we look at the Quran and the Hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the believers when He's trying to tell them to do good. The same thing with the Prophet ﷺ. He said, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir." Whoever believes, la yu'minu ahadukum hatta. You will not attain the level of believing or the concept of believing until you do such and such. So now we said, okay, so now I became Muslim. Then I have to go to the next step of becoming a believer. So what does it entail? Okay, so we said I have to believe in Allah. Okay, I believed in my heart. Now the Prophet ﷺ says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. One does not attain the true level of believing until they love for their fellow brother or sister what they love for themselves. So you say, okay, I do that. Then we go to the next step. So now we came to the company and they said, if you need to move to the next level within that company, you have to follow these rules. So now we said, okay, so now I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I believe that I need to be nice to my neighbor, and I believe that I have to be nice to my guests, and all these different levels of Iman. Then the Prophet ﷺ, when Angel Jibreel took it to the next level, and he said, what is Ihsan? And Ihsan is what defines the different level of believers. Because me and somebody else believe that we have to follow what the Prophet ﷺ said when he said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. One does not attain the true believing until we love for our brothers what we love for ourselves. But the difference is, now we come into the Ihsan level and we say, okay, how much more, or how much perfection you have when you're doing that level of Iman, or that level of good deed. Because that's what's going to carry us, that's what distinguishes you from the step before, and from the step before that. We said, okay, now we're Muslims, and now we got into the different levels of Iman. Now within each level, we have to compete. Who's a better mu'min? And who does more in good deeds than others? Because when you think about it, this is what Ihsan is, striving for perfection. And ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah, you're worshipping, you're doing the good deeds as if you're seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of you. So you're doing everything to perfection. And if you can't see him, then know he's looking at you, he's seeing you, he's watching everything that you're doing. And then after that, Jibreel asked the Prophet about Judgment Day. And the Prophet ﷺ told him that, whoever is responsible for it knows more about it than you are. So he asked him to tell him some signs of it. And the Prophet ﷺ told him some signs of it. When you look at that last section, that's a reminder that we are timed. That we're not living forever. That we don't know when is it that we're going to die. So we can't just sit back and say, well, okay, I got to the first level of Islam, then yeah, I'm struggling with the first level of believing, and I have my whole life. No, see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has all of these things in order for us. When Jibreel asked the Prophet in that order, they were done for a reason. So when we look at this hadith, we can take it as a test for ourselves. Because we can think of saying, well, yeah, I am Muslim and I am a believer, and I am doing things for perfection, or trying to perfect my good deeds. But then at what level are you doing them? And this is a perfect hadith to use as a measure of how advanced or how much you need to do before you can get to the next level. Review the 5 pillars that we're doing every day, or that we're doing once a year, and see how much of it you're doing. And then go to the next level of Iman. And if you read the Quran, it's almost every page Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the believers, or gives the reward for the believers. The same thing with the Prophet ﷺ, when he's talking in his ahadith, he's referring to the believers, referring to those mu'mineen. And the same thing with the Ihsan. how much are we doing it? You know, when we go visit the sick, are we doing it every time we know there is somebody sick? Or we're just doing it once a year? You know, are we being generous to our neighbors when we need something? Or are we always doing it? We really have to look at those things, because this is what's going to determine the level of iman. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم, ask God for forgiveness. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله سيدنا محمد صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. Dear brothers and sisters, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us Islam, so many hadith, so many examples of how we can live our lives, how we can progress, and how we can move from one point to the other. How can we measure our progress in life? Imam al-Nawawi, may Allah be pleased with him, collected about 42 ahadith that he thought that would be a good way for Muslims to start living their lives. Just to live the basics, to be able to understand and go through the basics. And this is the second hadith. Take this hadith as a way of measuring your progress in life. Take it step by step. Look at Islam. Are we really Muslims? Because for us to be considered Muslims, we have to follow the 5 pillars. So when we say, I testify that there's no God but Allah and that Muhammad is His messenger, am I really doing this? When I fast, when I give charity. Because giving charity is one thing. You know, me taking $20 out of my pocket and putting in the donation box is one thing. But then taking that part and going to the second part of the hadith when it says believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and believing in His messengers and believing in the books, and then carrying and connecting the charity that we did in Islam with doing it, knowing in our hearts that we're doing it for the right reasons. That we're doing it because we're believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only that, we take it to the third level of ihsan. So now we're giving charity. Not only that we're giving it, but we're giving it because we have that true believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That belief is in our hearts. And then we add to it the ihsan part. We're doing it to perfection. And then the last part of knowing that this is, or this could be the last time that we give charity. And keeping the reminder that there's Judgment Day. Having that reminder that this charity that we gave, this good deed that we did, might be the last thing that we do. Or might be the thing that will carry us and continue to accumulate hasanat after we're dead. So we have to take all the actions that we do and run them through this test. Is it part of Islam? Me doing what I'm doing, is this considered part of the characteristics of a Muslim? And then if we say yes, then we need to move forward and take it to the next level and say, okay, now which part of the believing does it fall under? Does it fall under the believing in Allah? Does it fall under believing the messengers of the Prophet ﷺ, or the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what they came with? Or does it fall under the other stuff? Believing in the books or believing in the angels? And then you take that to the third step of ihsan. And doing it to perfection. Improving on it over and over and over again. At the same time, keeping the Judgment Day in the back of our minds. Having it as a reminder. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the strength to be able to pull the weaknesses out of our hearts and be able to distinguish what's right from what's wrong.